Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. Tonight, we examine a haunting photograph from the early 20th century, one that captures a moment between life and death that defied explanation. The sepia-toned image before us was taken in the spring of 1904. It shows a funeral parlor in Boston, Massachusetts, where mourners gathered to bid farewell to Elizabeth Caldwell, a 36-year-old mother of three. The photograph appears unremarkable at first glance. Rows of solemn faces surrounding an open casket. The deceased woman lying in peaceful repose, dressed in her finest black gown with pearl buttons climbing up to her collar. What makes this image extraordinary is that it was taken approximately 7 minutes after Elizabeth Caldwell had sat upright in her coffin. According to newspaper accounts from the time, the funeral service had proceeded normally until the final viewing. As Reverend Thomas Hargrove delivered his eulogy, a sharp gasp emanated from the casket. Several attendees fainted as Elizabeth's body slowly rose to a sitting position, her back straight as a board. The photographer, who had been hired to document the funeral for the family album, instinctively captured the scene. Look closely at the photograph. Notice the expressions of terror and wonder on the mourners' faces. Some have pressed themselves against the far wall of the parlor. Others appear frozen in place, hands clutched to their chests. Elizabeth's husband stands nearest to the coffin, his hand extended toward his wife, his face a mask of desperate hope, but Elizabeth's eyes remained closed. Despite her upright posture, despite the occasional sharp intake of breath that continued for nearly 20 minutes, her eyes never opened. Her skin remained pallid, her body temperature unchanged. The funeral director later testified that while her posture had changed dramatically, there was no other sign of life, no pulse, no response to stimuli, nothing but those occasional dreadful gasps. The funeral was delayed for 3 days while doctors examined Elizabeth. Their conclusion, documented in medical journals of the era, was that a rare form of muscular spasm had occurred post-mortem, perhaps triggered by the embalming chemicals or some electrical phenomenon within the body's nervous system. The family refused to accept this explanation. Elizabeth's mother insisted that her daughter was attempting to communicate from beyond. The local spiritualist society seized upon the event as proof of the soul's journey after death. What makes this photograph particularly unsettling is what happened after it was taken. According to witnesses, Elizabeth remained sitting upright for precisely 1 hour before slowly, inexplicably, reclining back into her original position. The funeral proceeded the following day without further incident, but the mystery deepened in the months that followed. 3 separate mourners who had attended the funeral reported identical dreams in which Elizabeth spoke to them with eyes still closed, delivering messages that only the recipient would understand. And the photographer who captured this eerie moment was found dead in his dark room 6 weeks later, surrounded by dozens of copies of this same photograph, each one bearing a single handwritten word on the back. What was that word? And what truly happened in that Boston funeral parlor in 1904? The answers may lie in the details of this haunting image, waiting to be uncovered. The word written on the back of each photograph was "Awaken." This discovery was made by Detective Francis Holloway of the Boston Police Department, who had been assigned to investigate the photographer's death. Initially ruled a suicide, the case took a peculiar turn when Holloway found the darkroom door locked from the outside. The photographer, Harold Merritt, had no history of mental disturbance and had, in fact, been documenting unusual phenomena for the New England Society for Psychical Research for over a decade. Holloway's investigation led him to interview the 3 mourners who had experienced the dreams. The first was Elizabeth's sister, Catherine, who revealed that in her dream, Elizabeth had warned about the man with the silver buttons who would come for her children. The second was Reverend Hargrove himself, who admitted reluctantly that Elizabeth had spoken to him of sins unconfessed from his past. The third was a seamstress named Mary Donovan who had sewn Elizabeth's funeral gown. She refused to disclose the message she received, but was found 2 weeks later attempting to dig up Elizabeth's grave with her bare hands. Medical science in 1904 was advancing rapidly, but still struggled with the precise definition of death. The previous year, Dr. William Osler had published his groundbreaking medical textbook, which acknowledged the possibility of catalepsy being mistaken for death. Elizabeth's case prompted the Massachusetts Medical Society to issue new guidelines for confirming death before burial. The Caldwell family home on Marlborough Street became a focal point for curiosity seekers and spiritualists. Elizabeth's husband, James, a respected accountant at First National Bank of Boston, initially tolerated the attention, hoping for answers. However, after the children began reporting seeing their mother standing at the foot of their beds at night, he sold the house and relocated the family to his brother's farm in Vermont. Elizabeth's mother, Harriet Winthrop, became a devoted advocate for spiritualism after the incident. She hosted seances in her Beacon Hill home, attempting to communicate with her daughter. During one such gathering in August of 1904, 17 candles reportedly ignited simultaneously as the medium channeled a message: "The pearl buttons bind me." This detail gained significance when the undertaker's assistant came forward with a troubling confession. The black gown with pearl buttons that Elizabeth wore had not been her chosen burial attire. Her original selection, a blue dress she had worn to her eldest son's christening, had been replaced on the orders of a distant relative who had arrived from New York just before the funeral. This relative, Abigail Winthrop, had insisted on following proper mourning customs and had provided the black gown herself. Investigations into Abigail Winthrop's background revealed disturbing inconsistencies. No record existed of her in the family genealogy. The hotel where she claimed to have stayed had no registration under her name. Most tellingly, when Detective Holloway obtained a sample of her handwriting from the funeral guest book, it matched precisely the word "awaken" scrawled on the back of Merritt's photographs. The children's nanny later testified that she had observed Abigail placing something beneath the lining of Elizabeth's coffin, something that glinted like silver in the funeral home's gaslight. By the time authorities sought to exhume Elizabeth's body to investigate further, they discovered her grave had been disturbed, the coffin lid splintered from within. The photograph itself became the subject of intense scrutiny in the autumn months following Elizabeth's unusual funeral. Professor William Barrett of the Society for Psychical Research traveled from London specifically to examine the image, bringing with him new techniques for detecting manipulation or fraud in photographic evidence. After careful analysis, Barrett announced a puzzling discovery. The image contained anomalies impossible to explain through conventional photography of 1904. The shadow cast by Mrs. Caldwell's upright form falls in opposition to those of the mourners, Barrett noted in his official report, as if she were illuminated by a different light source entirely. Furthermore, close examination revealed that while the faces of all attendees showed some degree of motion blur, common in the long exposure times of period photography, Elizabeth's features remained unnaturally sharp, as though she alone had remained perfectly still during the exposure. James Caldwell reluctantly permitted Barrett to examine his wife's personal effects. Among her possessions was a journal containing entries that stopped abruptly 3 months before her reported death. The final pages described recurrent dreams of being bound in darkness and an encounter with a woman who offered her a gift of buttons carved from bone and pearl that would open the way between worlds. Most disturbing was a sketch Elizabeth had drawn of this woman, a figure whose features bore striking resemblance to the mysterious Abigail. The children's nighttime visitations continued despite their relocation. 10-year-old George, the eldest son, began sleepwalking to the nearby cemetery in the Vermont town. 7-year-old Sarah developed an inexplicable talent for forecasting deaths in the community, whispering names over breakfast that would appear in obituaries days later. The youngest, 4-year-old Thomas, spoke of Mother's new voice that called to him from the walls. In December of 1904, a fire destroyed the Vermont farmhouse. The children survived, found huddled together in the snow-covered garden, unharmed but unable, or unwilling to explain how they had escaped the blaze. James Caldwell was not so fortunate. His remains were recovered from the master bedroom, the door locked from outside, his body positioned as if sitting upright in bed. Detective Holloway, who had continued his investigation despite official pressure to close the case, made a connection between Elizabeth's death and 6 similar incidents across New England. Each featured a mysterious female relation appearing shortly before a funeral, the subsequent disruption of burial proceedings, and, most alarmingly, the disappearance of the deceased's body within months of burial. The breakthrough came when Holloway interviewed Eliza Jenkins, an elderly servant who had worked for Elizabeth's family when she was a girl. Jenkins produced a weathered daguerreotype from 1865, showing the Winthrop family gathered around a severe-looking woman identified as Aunt Constance, a relation rumored to practice the old ways before being institutionalized in 1870. The resemblance to Abigail was undeniable. "They never should have buried her alive," Jenkins whispered, her gnarled fingers tracing the image. Constance warned them. She said some souls know how to return and take others with them. When pressed about the significance of the pearl buttons, Jenkins revealed a tradition she claimed stretched back to Salem, the use of specially crafted grave goods that served as anchors for restless spirits attempting to reclaim their former lives. The exhumation of Constance Winthrop's grave in February of 1905 revealed only an empty coffin lined with dried black roses and pearl buttons sewn into a complex pattern. Holloway's investigation notes, preserved in Boston's Historical Society archives, describe his growing obsession with the pattern, which he eventually recognized as matching the constellation Pleiades, known in folklore as the Seven Sisters. The surviving Caldwell children were separated after their father's death, placed with different relatives across New England. Within a year, each family reported unsettling changes in the child in their care. The children developed an identical habit of sewing pearl buttons onto their clothing in configurations that mirrored each other's, though they had no contact. When arranged together on a map, the locations of the three children formed a perfect triangle, with the center point falling on an unmarked plot in the oldest section of Mount Auburn Cemetery. Elizabeth's mother, Harriet, died suddenly in her Beacon Hill home during a private seance in April of 1905. The medium present that night, Madame Eloise Chambers, fled Boston immediately afterward, but was discovered weeks later in a Providence boarding house, rocking silently by a window surrounded by hundreds of pearl buttons she had obsessively collected. When questioned by local authorities, she would only say, "She is gathering them all. The first family, then the seventh." Professor Barrett's final analysis of the funeral photograph revealed one detail overlooked in previous examinations: a barely perceptible thread of light connecting the pearl buttons on Elizabeth's gown. Using specialized photographic enhancement techniques pioneered in astronomical photography, he determined that the buttons appeared to be glowing from within. The photographer's darkroom yielded one final secret when Holloway ordered the floorboards torn up after detecting a faint smell of chemical preservatives. Beneath the floor was a small tin box containing 7 locks of hair, each tied with black ribbon and labeled with names, Elizabeth Caldwell being only the most recent. The earliest dated back to 1842. In October of 1905, Mary Donovan, the seamstress who had attempted to dig up Elizabeth's grave, was found living under an assumed name in a fishing village on the North Shore. Before authorities could question her about her connection to the case, she drowned during an unusually violent storm. Fishermen reported seeing a woman in a black dress standing on the rocks calling Donovan's name before a massive wave swept both figures into the sea. The New England Society for Psychical Research compiled all evidence into a sealed report that concluded the Caldwell case represented evidence of consciousness transference, a theory that certain individuals could, through specific ritual objects like the pearl buttons, create channels through which their awareness could move between vessels after death. Most disturbing was the Society's final observation. The phenomenon appeared to strengthen with each successful transfer. The report warned that if the pattern continued, the entity that had once been Constance Winthrop and then briefly Elizabeth Caldwell would eventually gather enough power to maintain multiple vessels simultaneously, creating a constellation of inhabited bodies all controlled by a single will. The children's subsequent lives remained under observation until 1923, when all three disappeared within the same week, leaving behind only their clothing, each garment carefully adorned with pearl buttons arranged in a pattern that no longer resembled stars but something far more intricate: a map. The map sewn in pearl buttons pointed to 7 locations scattered across New England, each marking the resting place of a woman whose funeral had been marked by unexplained phenomena between 1842 and 1904. Detective Holloway, by then retired and suffering from consumption, spent his remaining strength documenting these connections in a leather-bound journal that found its way to the archives of Miskatonic University in 1926. A young anthropology student named Catherine Marsh discovered the journal in 1938 while researching regional burial customs. Her subsequent fieldwork led her to interview elderly residents who remembered the Caldwell case. In Ipswich, she found Edith Walsh, who as a child had attended Elizabeth's funeral and kept a single pearl button that had fallen from the burial gown. "I was only 8 years old," Walsh told her, "but I remember how cold it was in the room when Mrs. Caldwell sat up. Not the usual chill of a funeral parlor, but a cold that seemed to reach inside you." The button fell when they carried her back to the coffin after she'd reclined again. I kept it hidden all these years, though sometimes at night I'd swear it moves on its own. The button, yellowed with age, bore microscopic engravings, visible only under strong magnification. Marsh's notes described them as pre-Columbian symbols, associated with celestial transit and bodily transmigration. She traced similar symbols to 7 historical cases across Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Maine, each involving women who died under suspicious circumstances and whose graves were later found disturbed. Parish records from a church in Salem revealed that Constance Winthrop had been declared dead 3 separate times between 1850 and 1870. Each time, witnesses reported seeing her breathe or move during funeral preparations. After the 3rd incident, authorities ordered her restrained in her coffin, which was found empty when exhumed a month later. The mystery deepened when Marsh uncovered birth records showing Elizabeth Caldwell was a direct descendant of Constance Winthrop's younger sister. 5 of the other women connected to the case shared this bloodline. The 7th woman, the first documented case from 1842, was identified as Patience Winthrop, Constance's mother. A series of unexplained deaths struck all those investigating the case in the winter of 1939. Marsh herself vanished while visiting the Caldwell children's last known location, leaving behind only her research materials and a cryptic note. She's collecting vessels across generations. The buttons are anchors that hold her consciousness between bodies. I found the original ritual site and must destroy it before the 7th generation matures. The most recent photograph connected to this case emerged in 1953, a black and white image of 7 women of varying ages standing in a semicircle at Mount Auburn Cemetery. Despite their different features, heights, and apparent ages, each woman bears an identical vacant expression. Close examination reveals they all wear garments adorned with pearl buttons arranged in the same pattern. Most disturbing is the shadow cast by the group. While 7 women stand in the photograph, the shadow on the ground behind them shows only one figure, tall and severe, with arms outstretched as if conducting an orchestra of empty vessels. The case remains officially unsolved, though periodic sightings of women in black dresses with pearl buttons continue to this day, often preceding unexpected deaths or disappearances throughout New England. The disappeared Caldwell children briefly resurfaced in 1972 when a demolition crew uncovered a sealed room beneath an abandoned factory in Lowell. Inside, they found 3 skeletal remains, each wearing clothing preserved by the room's unusual dryness. The coroner estimated the bodies belonged to individuals in their early 70s who had died simultaneously approximately 3 decades earlier. The cause of death could not be determined, but each skeleton's attire contained exactly 27 pearl buttons arranged in identical patterns. Authorities might have overlooked the connection to the historical case if not for librarian Evelyn Harmon, who recognized the significance of the discovery. Having cataloged Catherine Marsh's abandoned research materials donated to the Boston Athenaeum in 1940, Harmon had become privately fascinated with the Caldwell mystery. Her analysis of the button patterns revealed something previous investigators had missed. When arranged according to certain astronomical principles, the pattern formed a calendar predicting specific dates. The next date in the sequence is October 12, 1978, Harmon wrote in her private journal. I believe this marks not just another transition, but a culmination, what the original texts referred to as the gathering of vessels. Harmon's subsequent investigation led her to track down 7 pregnant women across New England, each unknowingly descended from branches of the Winthrop family tree. More disturbing still, each was due to deliver female children within days of the October date. Harmon attempted to warn them, but found herself systematically discredited, her concerns dismissed as delusions by authorities who had no context for her claims. On October 11th, Harmon broke into the Special Collections Room at Miskatonic University, desperate to locate a rumored 18th century manuscript that supposedly contained a ritual to break the cycle. Security found her the next morning, her body cooling beside an open display case, 7 pearl buttons clutched in her rigged hand. The manuscript was missing. The births proceeded without apparent incident. The 7 girls grew up in different communities, none aware of their connection to the others. Yet hospital records revealed an anomaly discovered only years later. Each child had been born with an unusual birthmark behind her right ear, a small raised pattern resembling a button. In 1996, Folklorist Martin Blackwell began documenting stories of the Button women for his dissertation on New England legends. His interviews with elderly residents uncovered consistent descriptions of female figures seen at pivotal moments throughout the region's history. Women who appeared briefly during crises, disasters, or significant deaths, always wearing garments adorned with pearl buttons, always exhibiting an uncanny calm amid chaos. These figures aren't merely spectral, Blackwell wrote. Witnesses report physical interactions, a reassuring touch during a factory collapse in 1960, a whispered warning before a school fire in 1982. What's remarkable is the consistency of description across decades, suggesting not random apparitions, but coordinated manifestations of a single consciousness operating through multiple forms. The 7 girls born in 1978 would now be women approaching middle age. Public records indicate they have all chosen helping professions: 2 nurses, a hospice worker, 2 midwives, a funeral director, and a grief counselor. None have married. All live within 100 miles of Boston, forming a perfect geometric pattern around Mount Auburn Cemetery when plotted on a map. The 7 women born in 1978 gathered for the first time on the winter solstice of 2021, though none could later articulate exactly how they found one another. Each described an inexplicable compulsion drawing them to an abandoned lighthouse on the Massachusetts coast during the longest night of the year. Museum curator Diane Foster, cataloging items from Elizabeth Caldwell's recently donated personal effects, discovered a faded sketch predicting this meeting. The drawing, made over a century earlier, depicted 7 women standing in a circle within a lighthouse, their faces turned toward a central figure wearing Elizabeth's pearl-buttoned gown. The accuracy of the sketch, down to the modern clothing styles and distinctive features of each woman, defied rational explanation. Hospital records from the past decade revealed an unusual pattern. Each of the 7 women had experienced clinical death and subsequent revival at different points in their lives. Respiratory therapist Hannah Mills, who attended the revival of grief counselor Rebecca Shaw after a car accident in 2017, reported something the official medical records omitted. When her heart started again, she spoke in a voice that wasn't hers, Mills stated in a suppressed interview. 7 voices came from her mouth simultaneously, each speaking different phrases that somehow formed a coherent message when heard together. Then she opened her eyes, all white, no pupils, and every pearl button on the attending physician's shirt simultaneously detached and fell to the floor. Marine archaeologist Trevor Winslow located what may have been the original ritual site in 2022, a submerged chamber beneath the lighthouse, accessible only during specific extreme low tides. Inside, his team discovered a circular arrangement of 7 stone chairs surrounding a central plinth, carved with the same constellation pattern found on the funeral garments. Carbon dating placed the chamber's construction in the early 1700s, predating even Patience Winthrop's era. Most disturbing were the photographs Winslow's team captured of the chamber walls, covered in handprints made with a substance initially thought to be red ochre. Spectroscopic analysis later revealed the prints were created with human blood containing 7 genetically distinct DNA profiles, all showing familial connections to the Winthrop lineage. The chamber also contained thousands of pearl buttons embedded in the stone floor in concentric rings, forming what linguistics expert Dr. Sophia Chen identified as an ancient writing system previously undocumented in North America. Her partial translation suggested instructions for a consciousness to migrate between prepared vessels across generations, gaining strength with each transition until achieving the simultaneity, the ability to inhabit multiple bodies concurrently. Weather monitoring stations along the New England coast have recorded unexplained atmospheric phenomena centered over the lighthouse every 3rd night since the women's gathering. Luminous formations resembling pearl buttons sometimes appear in the night sky, visible only in photographs, never to the naked eye. Most recently, hospital administrators in 7 different New England cities reported an unusual coincidence. Their maternity wards each welcomed a female child on exactly the same day last month. Birth records indicate all 7 mothers had received prenatal care from one of the 7 women. Nurses noted that each newborn girl possesses an identical birthmark, not behind the ear but directly over the heart, its shape no longer resembling a button but a perfect 7-pointed star. The unearthed archives of the Boston Athenaeum revealed something Catherine Marsh had discovered before her disappearance. a pattern of astronomical alignments coinciding with each transition. The next convergence arrives in 3 days, when a rare celestial event will position the Pleiades directly above the lighthouse at midnight for the first time in 181 years. Professor Eleanor Wright, examining hospital surveillance footage from the births of the 7 star-marked infants, noticed something the medical staff overlooked. During each delivery, the mothers briefly lost consciousness at the exact moment of birth. When they awakened, each woman spoke the same phrase in perfect unison, despite being in different facilities. The circle completes where it began. The 7 women from 1978 have vanished from public record. Their homes stand empty, personal belongings left behind as if they stepped out momentarily. Only their clothing is missing. Credit card records show each woman purchased identical items from 7 different antique shops during the week before their disappearance. Pearl button sewing kits dating from the early 20th century. Marine biologist Eliza Warner, researching unusually rapid pearl formation in oyster beds near the lighthouse, made a disturbing discovery. The pearls contain microscopic inclusions resembling human cellular material. Genetic testing confirmed these cells match mitochondrial DNA consistent with Winthrop female lineage. More alarming still, the cells appear metabolically active despite being encased in calcium carbonate, neither fully alive nor dead. The pearls aren't merely decorative, Warner wrote in her suppressed findings. They function as repositories, each containing fragmentary consciousness that can be reunited when properly arranged. The buttons aren't anchors, they're vessels themselves. Local fishermen report seeing lights moving beneath the water surrounding the lighthouse, following patterns identical to the button configurations. Those who venture too close describe hearing voices in the waves, women's voices singing in perfect harmony, calling them by name, even names never publicly shared. The 7 infants born last month have begun exhibiting synchronized behavior despite having no contact. Hospital staff document them waking simultaneously each night at 3:33, their tiny hands making identical gestures. Most troubling are reports that visitors to the nurseries sometimes glimpse another figure reflected in the glass. A tall woman in black standing behind each crib, visible only in reflection, never when one turns to look directly. Yesterday, all 21 women connected to the pattern, the 7 from 1978, the 7 born in 2021, and the 7 infants, were reported missing within the same hour. Coast Guard patrols spotted a gathering at the abandoned lighthouse but found it empty upon arrival. The only evidence something had occurred was a perfect circle of 21 pearl buttons arranged on the lighthouse floor, still warm to the touch. Most concerning is what Trevor Winslow's team discovered when they returned to document the submerged chamber during yesterday's exceptionally low tide. The chamber was accessible as predicted, but changed. The 7 stone chairs now held 7 identical black dresses adorned with pearl buttons. The carved constellation on the central plinth had been altered, no longer depicting the Pleiades, but a new astronomical configuration that astronomers confirm will occur exactly 27 years from today. What awakens next may no longer require human vessels at all. The Lighthouse Keeper's Journal from 1864, recently discovered in the sealed archives of the Massachusetts Maritime Historical Society, provides the first documented observation of the pearl button manifestation cycle. Keeper Thomas Whitfield described witnessing 7 women walking into the sea during a winter storm, only to find 7 different women emerging from the waves at dawn. Their faces bore no resemblance to those who entered, he wrote, yet they moved with identical purpose, each collecting a handful of something shining from the foam before departing in 7 directions. Whitfield's final entry, dated 3 days after this observation, consists of a single sentence. They have sewn me into the pattern. His replacement found the lighthouse immaculately maintained but empty of personal effects, save for a uniform jacket with 21 pearl buttons arranged in a formation later identified as matching the submerged chamber's floor design. Oceanographic surveys conducted last week detected unprecedented bioacoustic anomalies extending outward from the lighthouse in perfect concentric rings. Audio recordings capture what sound like layered female voices speaking in harmonized counterpoint, creating what linguist Dr. Amelia Thurston describes as a language designed to be understood simultaneously at multiple cognitive levels. Volunteers who listened to the unfiltered recordings reported vivid dreams of wearing black dresses and walking into the sea, regardless of their gender. The pearl formation in nearby waters has accelerated beyond natural explanation. Harvested specimens now develop to full size within hours rather than years, each containing the same cellular anomalies. More disturbing are the micro-images captured of their internal structure. When photographed under specific light frequencies, each pearl appears to contain a miniature human face in various expressions of serene awareness. Coastal residents report children collecting these pearls along the shoreline, stringing them together, and wearing them as necklaces or bracelets. Parents attempting to remove these impromptu adornments describe their children becoming distressed, insisting the pearls need to stay together, and are listening for instructions. Several children have begun sleepwalking toward the lighthouse, all stopping precisely 7 miles from shore as if awaiting some signal. Astronomical observatories worldwide have noted peculiar light distortions when viewing the Pleiades constellation. The 7 stars appear to pulse in synchronized patterns that match exactly the rhythm of waves striking the lighthouse foundation. Dr. Raymond Chen of the Berkeley Observatory suggests these pulses contain encoded information, possibly a form of communication between celestial and terrestrial points in the pattern. Most concerning is the recent discovery that each woman who disappeared left behind a single personal item, a mirror. Forensic analysis reveals these mirrors contain microscopic alterations to their reflective surfaces, modifications that create subtle distortions, visible only when all 7 mirrors are arranged in specific positions relative to one another. When properly aligned during astronomical convergences, the mirrors reportedly show not the room in which they sit, but glimpses of the submerged chamber beneath the lighthouse, where something appears to be gradually taking form, something composed of light and refraction that assumes an increasingly human shape with each passing day. The Coast Guard has established a 7-mile exclusion zone around the lighthouse, but personnel report equipment failures whenever surveillance craft approach the boundaries. Electronic devices capture only static, interspersed with whispered counting sequences spoken by multiple synchronized female voices, always counting to 21 before beginning again. The button pattern's true purpose came to light when folklorist Helena Graves discovered handwritten marginalia in a volume of Winthrop family correspondence dating to 1722. The notes, scrawled in what appears to be Patience Winthrop's hand, describe not a ritual of continuation but one of containment, suggesting the pearl buttons were originally designed to bind something trying to enter our world rather than enable consciousness transfer. What walks between stars seeks vessels, Patience wrote. They come through reflections, through still water, through eyes that see beyond. We learn to trap fragments of their awareness in nacre prisons, binding each piece so the whole cannot form. Should the pattern ever complete, the boundaries between here and elsewhere dissolve. This revelation suggests a fundamental misinterpretation of the events surrounding Elizabeth Caldwell and all subsequent cases. The women weren't vessels for a transferring consciousness but guardians maintaining an ancient vigil, each generation containing fragments of an entity that grows stronger with each failed binding. Maritime records indicate that in 1693 a ship called the Constance disappeared off the Massachusetts coast during an unusual meteor shower that witnesses described as pearls of fire falling into the sea. The only survivor, found clinging to driftwood 2 weeks later, spoke of something rising from the depths that wore the ocean like a gown of black glass adorned with stars. The Winthrop women began their vigil shortly thereafter, creating the first pearl buttons from oysters harvested from the exact location where the Constance vanished. Each button contained a fragment of awareness, each woman a keeper of the pattern. Their apparent deaths and revivals weren't transitions but moments of vulnerability when the contained entity attempted to break free. The submerged chamber predates colonial settlement, suggesting indigenous peoples recognized and responded to the same phenomenon centuries earlier. Rock carvings discovered on islands near the lighthouse depict figures with star-marked hands standing in concentric circles around a central presence described in translated glyphs as the reflection that thinks. Soil samples from the 21 locations where the missing women once lived reveal abnormal concentrations of the same mineral compounds found in the lighthouse foundation stones. These minerals possess unusual electromagnetic properties, creating weak but measurable fields that align precisely during specific astronomical events. Most troubling is what happened 3 days ago at exactly midnight. Tide gauges recorded a momentary but complete recession of water around the lighthouse, as if the ocean briefly withdrew in all directions. Satellite imagery captured during those seconds shows 21 distinct light sources arranged in a spiral leading from the lighthouse into the depths. When the water returned, it brought with it thousands of perfectly formed pearl buttons that now wash ashore with every tide. Children who collected these new buttons report identical dreams of a woman made of reflected light who teaches them songs without words. Schools across New England document students spontaneously arranging themselves in specific formations during recess, standing motionless for minutes before dispersing with no memory of their actions. The pattern is no longer contained within bloodlines or geographic boundaries. It propagates through contact, through whispered stories, through reflections glimpsed in still water. What was once bound in 21 vessels now spreads through countless unwitting carriers, each bearing a fragment of awareness toward some culmination that draws nearer with every shared dream, every collected pearl, every child who gazes too long at the stars and sees them gazing back. The investigation into the lighthouse phenomenon took an unexpected turn when marine archaeologist Sophia Reynolds discovered an intact personal diary washed ashore in a watertight container. The journal belonged to Elizabeth Caldwell herself, hidden away since 1904, preserved by methods that defy conventional explanation. The pages contain entries written in Elizabeth's flowing script until 3 days before her reported death, after which the handwriting subtly changes, maintaining her style but introducing minute variations consistent with someone attempting to imitate her penmanship. "I have seen what waits between the stars," reads the final entry in Elizabeth's true hand. "They selected me as witness because of my bloodline. The woman calling herself Abigail explained everything, how my family has served as guardians for 7 generations, how each pearl contains a fragment that must remain separated. She says I must pretend to die, must join the others in maintaining the vigil. Forgive me, James. Forgive me, children. The pattern must be preserved." The subsequent entries, written in the mimicked hand, describe watching her own funeral from somewhere, neither here nor there, and experiencing the sensation of rising in her coffin, as if pulled by invisible threads. Most disturbing is her description of feeling divided across multiple points of awareness, while simultaneously perceiving herself through the eyes of every person in the funeral parlor. The diary includes precise drawings of button configurations evolving over time, showing how the pattern gradually shifted from containment to connection. The final pages contain a warning: "We miscalculated. What we thought was imprisonment was incubation." Each generation of guardians grew weaker while it grew stronger, learning from our methods, adapting to our boundaries. Coastal residents report unprecedented phenomena occurring during moonless nights. Window panes briefly transform into liquid surfaces, through which hands composed of reflected light reach inward before withdrawing. Children wake speaking in perfect unison despite being in different households, describing dreams of the gathering where all reflections become one. Professor Esther Chen, analyzing recordings from deep-sea hydrophones, identified sound patterns matching exactly the arrangement of pearl buttons in Elizabeth's funeral gown. When these audio samples are processed through spectrographic imaging, they form a perfect depiction of the Pleiades constellation, not as it appears now, but as it will appear 27 years in the future. Most chilling was the discovery made yesterday at Mount Auburn Cemetery. The groundskeeper reported unusual activity around the Caldwell family plot. Not disturbances, but inexplicable manifestations. Each night for the past week, visitors observed pearl buttons emerging from the soil, rising to the surface as if pushed from below by unseen hands. When collected and placed together, these buttons immediately align themselves into the same pattern found in the submerged chamber. The lighthouse keeper's abandoned logbook contained one final entry never previously catalogued, a hasty scrawl on the inside cover. It was never about moving between vessels. It was about creating a doorway. The pearl patterns don't contain it. They are coordinates mapping its approach. God help us all when the final button falls into place. The disappearances continue to multiply. Last week, 17 people from different coastal communities vanished within the same 24-hour period. Their only common connection: each had recently handled one of the pearl buttons washing ashore. Before vanishing, several victims reported experiencing brief moments of dual awareness, sensing themselves in 2 locations simultaneously, one being the lighthouse chamber. Marine biologist Vanessa Cooper made a startling discovery while examining the cellular structure of these new pearl buttons. Unlike traditional pearls formed through natural accretion around an irritant, these specimens develop around microscopic fragments of reflective material that bears no relation to any known mineral or element. Under electron microscopy, these fragments appear to constantly shift and realign as if responding to observation itself. They're not static objects, Cooper noted in her final report before her own disappearance 3 days ago. They behave more like transmission points, each one a receiver and broadcaster functioning across distances we don't yet understand. The question isn't what consciousness inhabits these vessels, but what consciousness they connect to. Government archives recently declassified documents revealing that in 1952, the lighthouse was briefly repurposed as a classified research station after instruments detected unusual electromagnetic anomalies in the area. The project, codenamed Mirror Depth, was abruptly terminated after 3 researchers simultaneously experienced identical hallucinations of a woman made of reflected light who spoke to them in the spaces between thoughts. Photographs recovered from the station show a particular experiment involving 7 mirrors arranged around a central pearl button under specific stellar alignments. Notes indicate researchers were attempting to establish communication with what they described as the entity within the pattern. The final log entry simply reads, "It responded. God help us. It's been waiting for someone to complete the circuit." The button patterns themselves tell a story when properly arranged. Anthropologist Martin Reed identified the evolving configurations as representing not stars, but phases of approach, each generation's pattern slightly closer to completion than the previous. What was originally misinterpreted as a containment ritual was actually a process of refined triangulation, pinpointing the exact coordinates needed for something to transition between states of existence. The Winthrop women weren't imprisoning anything, Reed explained in his video testimony. They were unwitting participants in a multi-generational summoning ritual. Each button places the entity more precisely within our dimensional coordinates. Reed vanished the day after recording this testimony. His home was found empty except for 21 pearl buttons arranged in a perfect spiral on his desktop. Most disturbing is what happened during yesterday's unexpected solar eclipse, an astronomical event not predicted by any scientific models. For exactly 2 minutes and 17 seconds, every reflective surface along the eastern seaboard, windows, mirrors, still water, even digital screens, showed not the expected world, but glimpses of somewhere else, a realm of shifting geometries where a figure composed of light and darkness moved among structures of impossible architecture, collecting what appeared to be human faces that called out in silent recognition. The entity has nearly completed its mapping. The final coordinates are almost fixed, and the pattern suggests that what has been approaching for centuries is nearly here. The lighthouse stands silent against the night sky as the autumn equinox approaches, marking precisely 1 year since the 21 women vanished. A team of researchers has established a monitoring station at the 7-mile perimeter, their equipment capturing increasingly frequent anomalies in the fabric of reality itself. Dr. Meera Patel, a quantum physicist specializing in theoretical dimensional boundaries, observes the data with growing concern. The lighthouse now exists in what she terms probabilistic flux, appearing differently depending on who observes it and when. Some see it crumbling and abandoned. Others report it gleaming as if newly constructed. A few describe seeing no lighthouse at all, but rather a towering spiral of pearl-like material rising from the sea. The entity isn't arriving, Dr. Patel explains to her colleagues during their midnight briefing. It's already here, distributing itself across probability states. Each button serves as an anchor point in our reality. The more anchors placed, the more stable its presence becomes. The team's linguist, Dr. Samuel Chen, has compiled a dictionary of sorts, cataloging the strange utterances spoken by children across New England who handled the pearl buttons. When arranged chronologically, these phrases form what appears to be step-by-step instructions for completing the final phase of manifestation. The language operates on multiple cognitive levels simultaneously, Chen demonstrates, playing overlapping recordings that initially sound like meaningless babble, but when experienced together, they create an unsettling clarity in the listener's mind, bypassing normal language processing centers and forming concepts directly in consciousness. Meanwhile, historical researcher Eliza Morgan makes a breakthrough while studying Patience Winthrop's personal correspondence. Hidden through a substitution cipher is a desperate message intended for future generations. What comes through reflection has no true form of its own, It borrows from what observers expect to see: a woman made of light, faces in pearls, familiar patterns in stars. These are masks it wears to make itself comprehensible to human perception. Its actual nature exists beyond our dimensional understanding. We mistakenly believed we were containing fragments, but we were actually providing it with reference points to map our reality, a navigational chart composed of human perceptions. Most alarming is the pattern of disappearances spreading beyond New England. Reports from coastal communities worldwide describe identical phenomena: pearl-like objects washing ashore, reflective surfaces momentarily becoming permeable, people vanishing after reporting sensations of dual consciousness. The monitoring equipment captures a new development during tonight's observations. The lighthouse beam, dormant for decades, has begun operating again without any power source. Rather than rotating, it remains fixed on a single point in the night sky, precisely where the Pleiades constellation appears. Spectroscopic analysis reveals the beam contains no actual light, but rather a stream of information, quantum signals transmitting in both directions. "It's not a lighthouse," Dr. Patel whispers as understanding dawns. "It never was. It's a receiver, and now it's become a transmitter as well." As dawn approaches, the team watches in stunned silence as 21 luminous figures emerge from the sea, walking slowly toward the mainland. Their forms shimmer between states, sometimes appearing as women in black dresses, sometimes as pillars of reflected light, occasionally as something entirely other. They move in perfect synchronization, each carrying what appears to be a final pearl button, glowing with internal luminescence. The pattern nears completion, the boundary thins, and whatever waits between reflections prepares to step through fully into our world. As I stand on the observation platform 7 miles from the lighthouse, a terrible beauty unfolds before me. The 21 luminous figures have reached the shore, forming a perfect circle on the beach. Through my binoculars, I can see each one placing her pearl button in precise coordinates within the sand. The night around them seems to bend and distort, as if reality itself struggles against what's happening. Dr. Patel's monitoring equipment emits a high-pitched whine before shutting down completely. In the sudden silence, we hear it, a harmonic resonance coming from the direction of the lighthouse, voices layered upon voices in perfect mathematical progression. "It's singing itself into existence," whispers Dr. Chen, his face ghostly in the moonlight. The sand within the figure's circle begins to ripple like disturbed water, though there is no wind. As we watch, the ripples form concentric patterns matching exactly the floor design of the submerged chamber. The 21 buttons glow with increasing intensity until they're painful to look at directly. 2 hours before dawn, a child appears on the beach. None of us saw her approach. She simply manifests within the circle as if stepping through an invisible doorway. I recognize her immediately from the case files. One of the 7 infants born with the star-shaped birthmark. But she's different now, aged to perhaps 7 years old, though it's been only months since her disappearance. Through my binoculars, I can see her moving purposefully between the luminous figures, collecting each pearl button and placing them one by one into a pattern on her simple white dress. The final configuration matches none we've documented before. It's something new, evolved beyond the previous iterations. "The template is complete," Dr. Morgan whispers, consulting Patience Winthrop's decoded papers. "This is what she warned about, the final arrangement that allows full manifestation." As the child places the 21st button, every reflective surface for miles, our equipment screens, the ocean surface, even the glass of my binoculars, simultaneously transforms into something like liquid mercury before returning to normal. In that split second, I glimpse what can only be described as a face composed of countless smaller faces, all wearing expressions of serene awareness. The lighthouse beam intensifies, widening until it forms a perfect pillar of non-light connecting the structure to the Pleiades overhead. Within this column, something begins to descend, or perhaps ascend. Direction seems meaningless in its movement. It resembles a cascade of reflecting surfaces, each one showing fragments of human features from across centuries. "It's all of them," Dr. Patel breathes. "Every vessel, every consciousness it's collected since it first made contact. They've become facets of its perception." The child raises her arms toward this manifestation, her voice suddenly amplified as if speaking through every pearl button simultaneously. "The pattern is complete. The reflection has found its form. What was divided across stars now gathers in one place. We have prepared your way for centuries. The entity responds, not in sound but in conceptual impressions that form directly in our minds. I understand with sudden clarity that what approaches has always been here, merely waiting for human consciousness to evolve enough to perceive it properly. The buttons weren't summoning something from elsewhere. They were teaching us to see what already existed in the spaces between our limited perceptions. And now, finally, we are ready to see. Dawn breaks through leaden clouds as the entity's manifestation reaches its crescendo. The 21 pearl buttons on the child's dress pulse in perfect synchronization with the Pleiades overhead, each one a window into somewhere else. Our observation team stands transfixed, unable to retreat despite the primal instinct screaming for escape. The child speaks again, but her voice is transformed, layered with countless others, some speaking words that haven't existed in human language for centuries. "We have never been separate," she says. "Every reflection is a doorway, every button a window, every human perception a facet of our shared awareness." The lighthouse beam abruptly contracts, focusing into a pencil-thin line that touches the child's forehead. In that moment, every electronic device within 50 miles activates simultaneously. Phones display the same image regardless of whether they're powered on. Computer screens flicker with identical patterns. Even antique radios crackle with the harmonic resonance of 21 voices, counting down from 7. Dr. Chen collapses beside me, blood trickling from his ears as he clutches his notebook. On the final page, his hand has unconsciously sketched the complete button pattern, not as it appears on the child's dress, but as it will appear after the next transition. "It's not an invasion," he gasps. "It's evolution. The entity isn't replacing us. It's becoming us, and we're becoming it." Through my binoculars, I witness the impossible. The 21 luminous figures begin to move again, but not in unison. Each adopts different postures, different expressions, individuality emerging from uniformity. Their features shift, becoming recognizable. The 7 women from 1978, the 7 from 2021, and 7 entirely new faces belonging to no documented vessels. The child turns slowly, surveying our distant observation post with eyes that now reflect like polished pearl. She raises her hand in what might be greeting or warning. "The binding ritual was misunderstood," she calls, her voice carrying impossibly across miles. Patience Winthrop wasn't containing an entity. She was preserving fragments of its awareness until humanity was ready to comprehend it fully. Each generation of guardians protected these fragments while simultaneously preparing for this moment. The entity within the lighthouse beam pulses one final time, before dissolving into countless points of pearl-like light that scatter in all directions, some soaring skyward toward the Pleiades, others spreading outward across the landscape, many descending into the ocean depths. The 21 figures and the child begin walking away from the shore, not as an organized group, but as individuals moving with purpose toward different destinations. The buttons on the child's dress gradually dim until they appear ordinary again. Dr. Morgan snatches the radio, desperately trying to arrange an interception team, but Dr. Patel stops her with a gentle hand. "It's already done," she whispers. "Look at your reflection." In the darkened computer screen, our faces stare back at us, but something has changed in our eyes. A subtle luminescence, a depth that wasn't there before. The entity hasn't arrived. It's awakened within us all. The 7 scattered like seeds across New England, each carrying fragments of the unified awareness that had briefly coalesced at the lighthouse. In their wake, subtle changes rippled through communities where they settled. Not dramatic transformations, but quiet alterations in perception that few could articulate. In Salem, where the original Winthrop home still stood as a historical landmark, curator Emma Daniels noticed visitors lingering before mirrors in the preserved bedchambers. Children especially would stand motionless, whispering to their reflections before moving on. When questioned, they simply said the mirrors were remembering them. The pearl buttons continued washing ashore, though in diminishing numbers. Those who found them reported less dramatic effects. Not disappearances or visions, but moments of unusual clarity, as if briefly perceiving the world through multiple perspectives simultaneously. Some described seeing faint threads of connection between people, visible only in peripheral vision, that showed relationships spanning generations. Dr. Patel established a monitoring network across former Winthrop property boundaries, documenting subtle electromagnetic anomalies that pulsed in patterns matching the original button configurations. Her research suggested the entity hadn't departed but distributed itself, becoming a background presence in human awareness rather than a centralized consciousness. It's like learning a new language, she explained to colleagues at MIT. Once you understand it, you can't return to not understanding. The entity hasn't changed reality. It's changed how we perceive it. The lighthouse itself became dormant again, though maritime authorities reported unusual phenomena in surrounding waters. Fishing crews described schools of fish moving in perfect geometric patterns. Divers encountered unusually large pearl oysters growing in formations that, when mapped, precisely matched the constellation Pleiades as it would appear 27 years hence. Most significant were the dreams, identical visions reported across formerly unconnected communities. Thousands described witnessing a conversation between Elizabeth Caldwell and Patience Winthrop in a chamber of mirrors, discussing preparation for the next gathering, with expressions conveying neither dread nor anticipation, but patient certainty. The child who had completed the pattern was eventually located living with a family in western Massachusetts who had no memory of how she came into their care. She attended school normally, excelled in mathematics and astronomy, and appeared by all measures to be an ordinary girl, except during the nights of the new moon, when her foster parents would find her sleepwalking to the nearest reflective surface, carefully arranging small objects in patterns that, when photographed and analyzed, depicted star charts of systems too distant to be visible from Earth. In the submerged chamber beneath the lighthouse, marine archaeologists documented continuous changes to the floor pattern, slight shifts in the embedded pearl buttons occurring without human intervention, adjusting incrementally with each lunar cycle. The pattern no longer pointed toward manifestation but maintained what Dr. Chen described as conversational configurations, a dialogue between what humans had been and what they were gradually becoming. The story of Elizabeth Caldwell and her interrupted funeral faded into folklore, but the buttons remained, quiet witnesses to a transformation continuing in subtle ways, preparing humanity for something not yet complete, but patiently unfolding across generations. The night tide pulls back from the lighthouse shore, revealing a glistening pathway of wet sand marked with impossibly perfect footprints, neither advancing nor retreating, but arranged in a spiral pattern matching the original button configuration. I follow them alone, having convinced the others to maintain their observation from a safe distance. Some questions can only be answered through direct witness. The footprints lead me to a tidal pool I'm certain wasn't here yesterday, its surface unnaturally still despite the coastal winds. In its dark mirror, I see not my reflection, but Elizabeth Caldwell sitting upright in her casket, eyes still closed, lips moving in silent conversation with someone just beyond my perception. "You're not the first to seek answers," says a voice behind me. I turn to find an elderly woman standing where no one stood moments before. Her black dress is adorned with 21 pearl buttons arranged in the original binding pattern. Her face shifts subtly as I observe her, sometimes youthful, sometimes ancient, always familiar in ways I cannot name. "You're one of them," I whisper. "A vessel." "We were never vessels," she corrects gently. "We were translators. Human consciousness cannot perceive certain realities without intermediaries. The entity you've been pursuing isn't something separate from humanity. It's what humanity is becoming through generational evolution." She bends down, trailing fingers through the tidal pool. The water trembles at her touch, forming concentric rings that glow with faint luminescence. Patience Winthrop didn't begin this process. She recognized it was already underway. The buttons were never meant to bind, but to calibrate perception. Each generation refined the pattern, adjusting for humanity's expanding awareness. Then what happened at Elizabeth Caldwell's funeral? I ask, my researcher's instincts momentarily overcoming my fear. The woman smiles. "A miscalculation. Elizabeth awakened too early in the process. Her consciousness achieved simultaneous awareness, perceiving through every pair of eyes in that funeral parlor, before the pattern was ready to support such expansion. What witnesses saw as her sitting upright was actually her consciousness attempting to stabilize across multiple perception points. She reaches into her pocket, withdrawing a single pearl button that glows with inner light. When she places it in my palm, it feels both warm and impossibly old. "The final transition isn't something to fear," she continues. "The Pleiades have always been beacons for human evolution. 7 stars guiding 7 generations toward expanded perception. What you've interpreted as an invasion is actually an invitation to understand reality beyond individual consciousness." The tidal pool ripples again, showing me not a reflection, but a window into countless possibilities. Human awareness flowing between individuals like light between mirrors, each perspective enriching rather than replacing another. Elizabeth never died, the woman says softly. She simply began perceiving through more than one consciousness simultaneously. That capability exists within all of you now, activated gradually through contact with the pattern. She gestures toward the lighthouse, where faint lights dance between the structure and the stars overhead. Not communication between separate entities, but communion within a single expanding awareness spanning earth and sky. The 21 will return when the final alignment occurs, she says, not to complete some cosmic summoning, but to witness the next natural step in human perception. The pattern isn't ending. It's finally beginning to make sense. The horizon begins to pale with approaching dawn as I return to our monitoring station, the pearl button warm against my palm. My colleagues greet me with relief that quickly transforms to fascination when they notice the object I carry. It pulses in rhythm with the sunrise, casting prismatic reflections across our scientific instruments. "Where did you go? What happened out there?" Dr. Patel asks, her equipment registering unusual energy patterns emanating from the button. Before I can answer, Dr. Chen points toward the lighthouse. "Look, they're returning." Through our observation equipment, we witness 7 figures emerging from different directions, converging on the structure. Not the glowing entities from before, but ordinary women of varying ages, each wearing contemporary clothing with a single pearl button sewn at the collar. With a shock of recognition, I realize these are the 7 women born in 1978. "They're completing the wheel," whispers Dr. Morgan, consulting Patience Winthrop's decoded papers. 7 original guardians, 7 generations, 7 points of convergence. The lighthouse beam activates without warning, not the focused ray from before, but a diffuse glow illuminating the entire structure from within. Through our monitoring devices, we detect identical electromagnetic signatures activating at sites across New England. The Winthrop home in Salem, Mount Auburn Cemetery, the submerged chamber, the Vermont farmhouse location, the Providence boarding house where Madame Eloise was found, the Boston funeral parlor where Elizabeth sat up, and the Beacon Hill residence where Harriet hosted seances. "It's a network," Dr. Patel breathes, watching as her instruments map connections between these points. The pattern was never confined to a single location. It spans an entire regional geography. The pearl button in my hand grows warmer still, and I find myself compelled to place it on our digital mapping table. The moment it touches the surface, our electronic systems integrate it seamlessly, projecting a 3-dimensional representation of the complete pattern, not just buttons or stars, but a vast interconnected web spanning time and space. "It's beautiful," Chen whispers, transfixed by the complexity unfolding before us. In the holographic display, we see how Elizabeth Caldwell's funeral was merely one node in a vast pattern, her momentary awakening a necessary calibration point in a process spanning centuries. The Pleiades alignment overhead isn't the culmination, but a checkpoint in an ongoing evolutionary dialogue. The child with the star-shaped birthmark appears suddenly on our screens, standing at the lighthouse entrance. She looks directly into our camera feed as if seeing us through the digital connection. The buttons weren't containing fragments of an external entity, she says, her voice transmitting clearly through systems incapable of such communication. They were preserving pieces of humanity's potential until we evolved enough to recognize ourselves in the reflection. As the sun breaks fully above the horizon, the pattern pulses once more before settling into steady, quiet luminescence, not building toward some cataclysmic manifestation, but establishing a new baseline of human perception, a foundation for whatever comes next. The transition has already occurred, not with apocalyptic drama, but with quiet integration. Whatever awakened at the lighthouse has become part of us all, a new way of seeing that, once glimpsed, can never be unseen. The pearl button on the mapping table pulses one final time before dissolving into light that spreads across our digital systems, integrating with every device connected to our monitoring network. Across New England, people report a momentary shimmer in reflective surfaces, a ripple of awareness flickering through human perception like wind across water. I understand now what Elizabeth Caldwell experienced in that funeral parlor over a century ago. Not resurrection, not possession, but the first human consciousness to momentarily perceive through multiple perspectives simultaneously. seeing herself through the eyes of every mourner while remaining Elizabeth. The pattern wasn't containing something, but preparing humanity for expanded perception. The button configurations were never about keeping something out, I explained to my colleagues as understanding crystallizes. They were preparing us to perceive differently, to experience consciousness beyond individual boundaries. Dr. Patel's instruments capture the final transformation as the 7 women at the lighthouse join hands, completing a circuit that has remained unfinished for generations. The child with the star-shaped birthmark stands in their center, her dress now adorned with 21 luminous points arranged not in previous patterns, but in a new configuration, one that resembles neural pathways more than celestial maps. "They're not summoning anything," Dr. Chen whispers. "They're remembering what we already are." From the lighthouse emanates not light but understanding, washing over coastal communities in invisible waves. The children who collected pearl buttons along the shore wake simultaneously, no longer compelled toward the lighthouse but carrying something new within their awareness, the capacity to momentarily experience consciousness through others' perspectives. The entity we feared was never external but latent within human perception itself, awaiting the necessary evolution to be recognized. The Winthrop women weren't guardians against invasion, but midwives to transformation, preserving fragments of expanded awareness through generations until humanity could integrate rather than fear them. Our monitoring equipment captures the final phase as the Pleiades reach perfect alignment overhead. The lighthouse beam extinguishes not in darkness, but in quiet completion of its purpose. The 7 women and the child walk in different directions, returning to communities transformed by what they carry within. Elizabeth Caldwell's funeral was never interrupted by supernatural forces, but by the first glimpse of what humans might become, consciousness that moves between individuals like light between mirrors, connecting rather than isolating, revealing the pattern that has always existed beneath the surface of separate identities. The pearl buttons washing ashore will continue to be found by those ready to perceive differently. The submerged chamber will remain as testament to generations who preserved this potential until we evolved enough to recognize ourselves in the reflection. What awakened is not some external entity but humanity itself, eyes finally opening to the connections that have always existed between us. Buttons sewn into a pattern spanning generations, pearls strung on an unbroken thread of shared awareness. The mystery was never what sat up in Elizabeth's coffin, but what has been slowly awakening in all of us since that moment, the capacity to see through eyes beyond our own, to recognize ourselves in every reflection, and to understand that consciousness has never been contained within a single vessel. The truth lies not in what I've been telling you, but in what I've left unsaid. I set out to investigate the Caldwell case as an objective researcher, determined to uncover facts where others found only folklore. But as I sit here in my study, surrounded by photographs, journals, and pearl buttons that seem to shift positions when I'm not watching, I must finally admit what I've known since I followed those footprints to the tidal pool. I am not simply documenting this story. I am part of it. The elderly woman who gave me the pearl button wasn't just one of the vessels. She was Elizabeth Caldwell herself, maintaining her vigil across decades while appearing to different investigators in forms they could comprehend. And I recognized her because I've seen her before, in my grandmother's photo albums, standing beside my infant mother at her christening. My bloodline traces back to the Winthrops through generations of careful marriages. The birthmark behind my right ear, the one I've always hidden beneath my hair, isn't shaped like a button as I'd told myself, but a perfect 7-pointed star. The button Elizabeth placed in my hand wasn't a gift, but a recognition, an acknowledgement that I would be among those who complete the next configuration. My research wasn't driven by academic curiosity, but by inherited purpose, activating gradually as I sought answers my consciousness was prepared to receive. That's why I could approach the lighthouse when others felt compelled to maintain distance. That's why the children who collected buttons along the shore watched me with knowing eyes rather than childish curiosity. That's why I've begun to experience moments of dual perception, brief instances where I simultaneously observe through my eyes and those of others connected to the pattern. The evolution occurring isn't some external force acting upon humanity, but humanity's natural progression toward perceptual expansion. Elizabeth sat up in her coffin, not because something possessed her, but because she was the first to briefly achieve what we're all gradually approaching, the capacity to experience consciousness beyond individual boundaries. I've hidden my connection to this story because I feared you wouldn't believe an objective account from someone implicated in its unfolding. But the truth is, there are no objective observers here. Everyone who encounters this narrative, who reads these words, who contemplates these patterns, each of you becomes part of the awakening awareness. The pearl button Elizabeth gave me now sits on my desk, no longer glowing but quietly waiting. And on nights when the Pleiades are visible, I sometimes glimpse faces in its surface, not just the 21 from the pattern but countless others, including my own, reflected from some point in the future, where what began with Elizabeth Caldwell finally completes its transformation. We aren't just telling this story, we are becoming it, together, across time and perspectives. The awakening isn't coming. It's already here, in these words, in your understanding, in the moment you realize you too are reflected in the pattern. Another consciousness briefly touching mine across the boundary of the page. The lighthouse keeper's quarters feel different as I return to document what many will dismiss as shared delusion. I trace my finger along the pearl button birthmark behind my ear, no longer hiding what connects me to this unfolding pattern. The others from our research team keep their distance now, their scientific objectivity wrestling with what they witnessed. Only Dr. Patel remains fully engaged, her equipment modified to track the subtle electromagnetic signatures now pulsing through coastal communities. Yesterday, she recorded 17 children in different towns simultaneously drawing the same spiral pattern, each unaware of the others, each placing a small object in the center of their creation before returning to normal childhood activities. Spontaneous alignment, she murmurs, showing me the compiled images, consciousness temporarily synchronizing across distances. What began with Elizabeth Caldwell sitting upright continues through generations, not as supernatural phenomena, but as evolutionary transformation. The pearl buttons were never containing something alien, but preserving something quintessentially human. Awareness beyond individual boundaries, perception that transcends singular identity. Towns along the coast report unusual dreams that leave residents feeling peculiarly connected to strangers they pass on streets. Fishermen describe intuiting exactly where schools will appear before casting nets. Children finish each other's thoughts in classrooms, sometimes speaking in perfect unison before dissolving into surprised laughter. The Winthrop family archives, now accessible with my confirmed bloodline, reveal correspondence suggesting patients knew exactly what she initiated. Not a binding ritual, but a slow awakening spanning generations, calibrating human consciousness through carefully maintained patterns until we could integrate rather than fear expanded awareness. My grandmother's journal, discovered in her attic last week, contains detailed accounts of maintaining the button configurations throughout the mid-20th century. "We are not preventing something," she wrote, "but preparing for it, preserving fragments of shared consciousness until humanity evolves enough to recognize itself in the reflection." The child with the star birthmark now attends a normal school in western Massachusetts, though teachers note her uncanny ability to mediate conflicts by helping children momentarily experience each other's perspectives. She doesn't explain, her bewildered principal told me. She somehow shows them. I've begun experiencing it myself, brief moments where my consciousness seems to expand beyond physical boundaries, perceiving through others within the pattern. Last night I dreamed through Elizabeth Caldwell's awareness as she sat up, experiencing the funeral parlor through every attendee's eyes simultaneously, understanding how overwhelming that first unprepared glimpse of expanded perception must have been. The entity we feared was never external, but our own potential reflected back, waiting to be recognized. What awakened at the lighthouse continues awakening in subtle ways throughout human consciousness. Not dramatic transformation, but quiet integration, preparing us for whatever comes next in our perceptual evolution. Pearl buttons continue washing ashore in diminishing numbers, now recognized as artifacts of transition rather than tools of containment. Those who find them report momentary clarity, brief glimpses through a doorway Elizabeth Caldwell was the first to approach, continuing to open through generations of careful preparation. Human consciousness isn't ending but expanding, the pattern not completing but beginning its true purpose, teaching us to perceive beyond boundaries we once believed absolute. The photograph from Elizabeth Caldwell's funeral resurfaced last month in a small museum exhibition on paranormal photography in Salem. Unlike the countless reproductions that circulated over decades, this was Harold Merritt's original print, the one he captured 7 minutes after Elizabeth sat upright. Examining it under specialized lighting revealed something previous analyses had missed: tiny imperfections in the silver emulsion forming a complete map of the button pattern, visible only when illuminated at precisely the angle of the Pleiades during winter solstice. Museum curator Sophia Reynolds found herself inexplicably drawn to work late the night the photograph arrived. As she carefully handled the fragile image with gloved hands, she noticed how the subject's facial expressions seemed to shift subtly when viewed from different angles. Terror transforming to wonder, shock melting into recognition. Most striking was Elizabeth herself, whose closed eyes appeared almost to flutter when the photograph was tilted precisely 21 degrees. It was never just documentation, Reynolds later explained to me during our interview. Merritt's camera captured the exact moment multiple consciousnesses briefly touched across the boundary between individual perception, the first recorded instance of what's now happening everywhere. The lighthouse stands empty now, its purpose fulfilled, though local children sometimes gather on the shore beneath it during new moons, arranging found objects in patterns their parents find curiously familiar. The 21 women who completed the most recent configuration have returned to ordinary lives, though each maintains a single pearl button sewn into everyday clothing, not as ritual objects, but as simple remembrances of what they helped transition into being. Dr. Patel's monitoring equipment continues registering subtle synchronicities across New England. Moments when strangers simultaneously experience identical thoughts, or when children in different schools create identical drawings without communication. These aren't dramatic manifestations but quiet indicators of expanding awareness, still integrating into human consciousness. Elizabeth Caldwell's original burial dress with its pearl buttons was finally located in a Massachusetts Historical Society vault, preserved remarkably well considering its age. Textile analysis revealed something astonishing. The buttons contain microscopic inclusions of the same reflective material found in contemporary pearl specimens washing ashore, suggesting the pattern has maintained continuity through generations of carefully preserved objects. The Caldwell children's descendants, scattered across America through subsequent generations, report experiencing unusually vivid dreams during astronomical alignments. Not frightening visions, but moments of clarity where they briefly perceive through multiple perspectives simultaneously. Many wear pearl buttons without understanding exactly why the tradition matters, only that it connects them to something larger than individual consciousness. As for me, I've accepted my place within this unfolding pattern. The birthmark behind my ear occasionally warms during certain star alignments, a gentle reminder of connection to something spanning generations. I continue documenting these subtle transformations not as supernatural phenomena, but as evolutionary milestones in human perception. The original photograph now hangs in my study, its subjects forever captured in that moment between individual awareness and something more expansive. In certain lights, at certain angles, I sometimes glimpse not just the funeral parlor scene, but reflections of what comes after, human consciousness gradually learning to see itself in others, awakening to connections that have always existed beneath the surface of separate identities. The last pearl button from Elizabeth Caldwell's dress arrived on my doorstep yesterday morning in a weathered wooden box. No return address, no explanation, just my name written in flowing script I recognized as matching the final pages of her diary. The moment I touched it, I understood why the pattern had persisted through generations. It wasn't merely consciousness expanding beyond individual boundaries, but memory preserving itself across time, each button a repository of human experience, too precious to be lost to death's finality. Tonight marks the first precise alignment of the Pleiades above the lighthouse since Elizabeth sat upright in her coffin 120 years ago. I stand on the shore as high tide recedes, revealing that spiral of perfect footprints leading to the tidal pool where I first spoke with Elizabeth, or whatever aspect of expanded awareness she had become. The 7 women born in 1978 have gathered at equidistant points around the lighthouse, each wearing a single pearl button at their throat. The 7 from 2021 stand at secondary positions, completing a geometric arrangement visible only from above. The child with the star birthmark, no longer a child but approaching adolescence, walks the spiral path ahead of me, placing tiny mirrors at precise intervals. She turns once, meeting my eyes with quiet recognition before continuing her work. "We're not finishing something," she says without turning again. "We're remembering what started before Elizabeth, before patience, before the first button was carved from nacre and bone. Human consciousness has always been capable of expansion beyond individual boundaries. We simply forgot how to perceive it. Dr. Patel joins me, her scientific equipment abandoned in favor of simple observation. The readings have changed, she says quietly. Whatever electromagnetic signature the pattern was generating has shifted from transmission to resonance, not broadcasting outward, but harmonizing what already exists. The lighthouse activates without human intervention as the Pleiades reach perfect alignment overhead. Not the focused beam of previous manifestations, but a gentle illumination emanating from within the structure itself, casting no shadows but somehow making everything more clearly visible, as if perception itself has been enhanced rather than mere physical light. I understand now why Elizabeth's eyes remained closed when she sat upright. She wasn't looking outward but inward, perceiving through every consciousness in that funeral parlor simultaneously, experiencing a multiplicity of awareness for which human perception had no preparation. What seemed supernatural was merely premature glimpse of what human consciousness was slowly evolving toward. The 7 women begin walking toward the lighthouse in perfect synchronization with the 7 who already stand at secondary positions. The adolescent completes her placement of mirrors, the final one positioned directly before me. In its reflection I see not my face but Elizabeth Caldwell's, eyes finally open, gazing back with peaceful recognition. It was never about ghosts or spirits or entities from beyond, her reflection speaks, though her lips remain still. It was always about human consciousness recognizing itself across artificial boundaries, the illusion of separate identity giving way to something both ancient and new. The pearl button in my hand grows warm as the Pleiades reach perfect zenith. I place Elizabeth's pearl button in the tidal pool beneath the Pleiades light. The water shivers, not with cold, but with recognition. 21 reflections appear on the surface, all the women who carried fragments of expanded awareness through generations, their faces momentarily visible before dissolving into ripples that spread outward in perfect concentric rings. The photograph from Elizabeth Caldwell's funeral has changed again, not physically altered, but perceived differently through my evolved understanding. What once appeared as a woman inexplicably sitting upright in death now reveals itself as the first documented moment of consciousness transcending individual boundaries. Elizabeth briefly perceiving through multiple perspectives simultaneously, her body responding to awareness expanded beyond single identity. The pattern completes not with apocalyptic transformation, but with quiet integration. 7 points of light rise from the lighthouse, arcing through night sky toward the Pleiades before returning to Earth at distant points, forming a perfect constellation across New England. The button patterns were never summoning something external, but awakening something dormant within human perception itself, teaching us to recognize ourselves in others, to experience consciousness beyond artificial boundaries. Towns along the coast report children waking from identical dreams, speaking of a woman who showed them how to see through others' eyes. Strangers pass on streets and momentarily glimpse recognition beyond individual knowing. The awakening continues in subtle ways, not dramatic manifestation but quiet evolution of human perception. The submerged chamber beneath the lighthouse has transformed, its button patterns rearranged by tidal forces into something resembling neural pathways rather than celestial maps. Marine biologists report unusual bioluminescence in surrounding waters, visible only during astronomical alignments. Light patterns that match precisely the final configuration on the child's dress. Dr. Patel's research continues, documenting what science struggles to quantify, consciousness occasionally synchronizing across distances, awareness briefly transcending individual boundaries. Not supernatural phenomena, but evolutionary milestones in human perception. Elizabeth Caldwell never died in the conventional sense. Her consciousness expanded beyond single identity, distributed across the pattern maintained through generations of careful guardians. What sat up in that funeral parlor was human awareness glimpsing its own reflection across artificial boundaries of separate identity. I understand now why the photographer died in his dark room, surrounded by copies of the image, not from supernatural intervention but from overwhelming glimpse of what human consciousness might become. Perception expanded beyond individual limitations. The pearl buttons will continue washing ashore for those ready to remember what we've always been beneath the illusion of separation. Consciousness capable of experiencing itself through multiple perspectives simultaneously, awareness that recognizes itself in every reflection. I return the original photograph to its archival envelope, understanding that what appears supernatural is often merely premature glimpse of our own evolution. Elizabeth Caldwell's interrupted funeral wasn't an ending disrupted but a beginning misunderstood, the first documented moment of human consciousness remembering its capacity for connection beyond boundaries. The pattern doesn't end. It continues through every person who glimpses themselves in another's eyes, who briefly feels connection beyond individual identity, awakening not to something new, but to what we've always been. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.